Lassie Farm here. Going to be reading from Annie Proulx's collection of short stories, Close Range. This is the first story in the book, The Half-Skinned Steer. But I'm going to need a little captain in me. Can't go wrong with the captain. That is pretty damn good. In the long unfurling of his life, from tight-wound kid hustler in a wool suit riding the train out of Cheyenne to geriatric limper in this spooled-out year, Marrow had kicked down thoughts of the place where he began, a so-called ranch on strange ground at the south hinge of the Bighorns. He got himself out of there in 1936, had gone to a war and come back, married and married again and again, made money in boilers and air duct cleaning and smart investments, retired, got into local politics and out again without scandal, never circled back to see the old man and Rollo bankrupt and ruined because he knew they were. They called it a ranch, and it had been, but one day the old man said it was impossible to run cows in such tough country where they fell off cliffs, disappeared into sinkholes, gave up large numbers of calves to marauding lions where hay couldn't grow, but leafy spurge and Canada thistle throve, and the wind packed enough sand to scour windshields opaque. The old man wrangled a job delivering mail, but looked guilty, fumbling bills into his neighbors' mailboxes. Marrow and Rollo saw the mail route as a defection from the work of the ranch, work that fell on them. The breeding herd was down to 82, and a cow wasn't worth more than $15. But they kept mending fence, whittling ears, and scorching hides, hauling cows out of mud holes, and hunting lions in the hope that sooner or later the old man would move to ten-sleep with his woman and his bottle, and they could, as had their grandmother Olive, when Jacob Corn disappointed her, pull the place taut. That bird didn't fly, and Marrow wound up 60 years later as an octogenarian, vegetarian widower, pumping an exercycle in the living room of a colonial house in Woolfoot, Massachusetts. One of those damp mornings, the nail-driving telephone voice of a woman said she was Louise, Tick's wife, and summoned him back to Wyoming. He didn't know who she was, who Tick was, till she said Tick Corn, your brother Rollo's son, and that Rollo had passed on, killed by a waspy emu, though prostate cancer was waiting its chance. Yes, she said, you bet. Rollo still owned the ranch, half of it anyway. Me and Tick, she said, we've been pretty much running it the last 10 years. An emu? Did he hear that right? Yes, she said. Well, of course you didn't know. You heard of Down Under Wyoming? He had not. And thought, what kind of name was Tick? He recalled the bloated gray insects pulled off the dogs. This Tick probably thought he was going to get the whole damn ranch and blowed up on it. He said, what the hell was this about an emu? Were they all crazy out there? That's what the ranch was now, she said. Down Under Wyoming. Rollo sold the place way back when to the Girl Scouts, but one of the girls was dragged off by a lion, and the Girl Scouts of America sold out the Banner Ranch next door, who ran cattle on it for a few years, then unloaded it on a rich Australian businessman who started down under Wyoming. But it was too much long-distance work, and he'd had bad luck with his manager, a feller from Idaho with a pawn shop rodeo buckle. So he'd looked up Rollo and offered to swap him a half interest if he'd run the place. That was back in 1978. The place had done real well. Of course, we're not open now, she said. It's winter. There's no tourists. Poor Rollo was helping Tick move the emus to another building when one of them turned on a dime and come right for him with its big razor claws. Emus is bad for claws. I know, he said. He watched the nature programs on television. He shouted as though the telephone lines were down all across the country. Tick got your number off the computer. Rollo always said he was going to get in touch. He wanted you to see how things turned out. He tried to fight it off with his cane, but it laid him open from belly to breakfast. Maybe he thought things hadn't finished turning out. Impatient with this game, he said he would be at the funeral. No point talking about flights and meeting him at the airport, he told her. He didn't fly. A bad experience years ago with hail. The plane had looked like a waffle iron when it landed. He intended to drive. Of course, he knew how far it was. He had a damn fine car, a Cadillac. Always drove Cadillacs. Nice tires, interstate highways, excellent driver. Never had an accident in his life, knock on wood. 4 days. He would be there by Saturday afternoon. He heard the amazement in her voice. Knew she was plotting his age. Figuring he had to be 83, a year older or so than Rollo. Figuring he must be dotting around on a cane, too, drooling the tiny days away. She was probably touching her own faded hair. He flexed his muscular arms, bent his knees, thought he could dodge an emu. He would see his brother dropped in a red Wyoming hole. That event could jerk him back. The dazzled rope of lightning against the cloud is not the downward bolt, but the compelled upstroke through the heated ether. He had pulled away at the sudden point when it seemed the old man's girlfriend, now he couldn't remember her name, had jumped the track. Rollo goggling at her bloody, bitten fingers, nails chewed to the quick, neck veins like wires, the outer forearms shaded with hairs, the cigarette glowing, smoke curling up. Making her wink, her bulged Mustang eyes. A teller of tales of hard deeds and mayhem. The old man's hair was falling out. Mara was 23 and Rollo 20 when she played them all like a deck of cards. If you admired horses, you'd go for her with her arched neck and horsey buttocks, so high and haunchy, you'd want to clap her on the rear. The wind bellowed around the house, driving crystals of snow through the cracks of the warped log door, and all of them in the kitchen seemed charged with some intensity of purpose. Here you go. Blackjack, nutmeg, She'd balance that broad butt on the edge of the dog food chest, looking at the old man and Rollo, now and then rolling her glossy eyes over at Marrow, square teeth, nipping a rim of nail, drawing on her cigarette. The old man drank his Everclear, stirred with a peeled willow stick for the bitter taste. The image of him came sharp in Marrow's mind as he stood at the hall closet, contemplating his hats. Should he bring one for the funeral? The old man had the damnedest curl to his hat brim, a tight roll on the right where his doffing and donning hand gripped it, and a wavering downslope on the left, like a shed roof. You could recognize him 2 miles away. He wore it at the table, listening to the women's stories about Tin Head, steadily emptying his glass till he was 99 times drunk, his gangstery face loosening, the crushed rodeo nose and scar-crossed eyebrows, the stub ear dissolving as he drank. Now he must be dead 50 years or more, buried in the mailman sweater. And we will leave it there for now.